Bilingualism and cognitive aging. Your brain might actually be protecting itself right now. While you're reading this in one language, millions of bilinguals around the world are doing something your monolingual brain simply cannot do. They're living in two linguistic worlds simultaneously. And it turns out that constant mental juggling might be building a cognitive reserve that delays dementia by years. But here's the catch. The benefit only shows up for some people. Which raises a really uncomfortable question. Does your ethnicity determine whether bilingualism saves your brain? That's what we're unpacking today. Because a massive new study just revealed that the bilingual advantage isn't universal. And the reason why might reshape how we think about brain health, inequality, and what actually protects us as we age. For decades, neuroscientists have been hunting for the holy grail of aging research. Find one modifiable factor, something people can actually change about their lives, that slows cognitive decline. And the bilingual brain kept showing up as a candidate. Study after study suggested that using two languages kept your mind sharper longer. It made intuitive sense. Speaking two languages is like mental CrossFit. Constant switching, constant mental load. Your brain should get stronger. But intuition isn't science. And science, it turns out, is messier than we thought. The real question wasn't whether bilingualism helps. The question was whether it helps everyone equally. That's where this research lives. Xia L., a researcher at Huazhong University in Wuhan, China, led a team spanning Cambridge, Oslo, and the University of North Texas. They published their findings in July 2026 in the Journal of Gerontology. And what they found upends the simple narrative that's been floating around for years. They weren't just curious. They were systematic. They wanted longitudinal evidence, data over time, not just snapshots. And they wanted it from a genuinely diverse population. No more studies of college-educated white Americans or specific immigrant groups. They wanted real-world complexity. Here's how they did it. They used data from something called the Health and Aging Brain Study, Health Disparities, or HABS-HD. This is a long-running US study tracking adults 50 and older. For this analysis, they looked at nearly 4,100 participants at their seventh wave of data collection. About 1,000 of them reported regularly using a second language. They're bilingual. Think of it like this. Imagine tracking everyone's brain health like you'd track a car's engine performance over a decade. Every 2 years, you get a full diagnostic. How's the memory running? How's the executive function? Then you compare the people who drive stick shift every day, bilinguals, to the people who never touch one. That's basically what they did, but they also looked at speed traps along the way. They specifically tracked people's cognitive decline over roughly 4 years, checking in at each mile marker. For the longitudinal part, the really important part, they followed 1,660 participants over 4 visits. 522 of them were bilingual. They measured executive function. They measured episodic memory. They tested dementia status. This wasn't casual. This was rigorous. Here's what they found, and this matters. Bilinguals showed a significant advantage at baseline. They had better executive function scores than monolinguals. That's the stuff your brain uses to plan, switch between tasks, ignore distractions. Better performance. Clear win for Team Bilingual. The effect was real, but not enormous. We're not talking superhero brains here, but measurable, meaningful. But then comes the problem. When they looked at how people declined over time, the picture got complicated. Bilinguals didn't decline any slower than monolinguals. They started ahead, but they weren't staying further ahead as they aged. The advantage doesn't seem to protect you from cognitive decline itself. It's there, and then it flattens out, and then ethnicity entered the room. Because here's the kicker. This advantage, it wasn't evenly distributed. White bilinguals and Hispanic bilinguals showed stronger benefits from bilingualism than other groups. The advantage for black bilinguals was smaller. Not insignificant, but smaller. This is the really important finding. because it suggests that bilingualism doesn't operate in a vacuum. Something about lived experience, access, socio-economic factors, or health equity is modifying how bilingualism affects your aging brain. Gender also mattered, though less dramatically. Women showed slightly stronger associations overall. But the ethnicity finding is the real story here. And it's unsettling because it raises a question nobody wanted to ask. Is bilingualism itself equally protective, or does the protective effect depend on broader patterns of inequality? So what does this actually mean for someone's life? If you're bilingual, you probably have better working memory right now. You're probably better at multitasking. That's real. That matters. But if you're hoping bilingualism is a shield against Alzheimer's, against the slow erosion of memory in your 70s and 80s, the evidence here is mixed. You get a head start. The starting line is higher, but you're not necessarily slowing down the decline itself. The limitations are important to name. This is observational research. People self-reported their bilingualism. We don't know how fluent they are, how often they actually switch languages, whether they use both languages equally. Someone who learned Spanish in high school but hasn't spoken it in 30 years might technically count as bilingual here. That matters. Also, the study captures a snapshot of behavior at one moment in time. Life is more dynamic than that, but here's what makes this study matter anyway. It's diverse, it's longitudinal, and it's honest about the complexity. The researchers aren't overselling bilingualism as a cognitive fountain of youth. They're showing that the story is more textured than we thought, because this finding sits in a conversation that's been happening for years about reserve capacity, the idea that your brain's complexity, your education, your cognitive engagement, can build up a buffer against decline. And bilingualism has always been the poster child for reserve, but maybe reserve isn't quite the right metaphor. Maybe it's more like having good insurance. It helps, but it's not a guarantee. The ethnicity finding is especially important because it raises a bigger question. If bilingualism's protective effects vary by ethnicity, what other aspects of brain health are we measuring wrong? What assumptions are we building into neuroscience research based on studying the wrong populations? This study doesn't answer that. But it makes the question impossible to ignore. This isn't the final word on bilingualism and aging. It's a speed bump in a narrative that's been moving too fast. And that might be the most important scientific contribution here, not the findings themselves, but the reminder that brain health is complicated. It's influenced by language, but also by inequality, by access, by lived experience, by ethnicity, by gender, by all the stuff we usually try to control away in laboratory conditions. Turns out, the bilingual brain is an advantage, just not the simple universal one we thought it was. And maybe the question we should be asking isn't whether bilingualism protects your brain. Maybe it's who gets to benefit from that protection, and why. Turns out, scientists have been busy, and they're not done yet.